I'm excited to announce that our Infosec Skills platform will be releasing a new challenge every month with 3 hands-on labs to put your cyber skills to the test. In September, you'll start in our Security Plus lab, exploring the ins and outs of secure and insecure protocols. Level 2, move on to explore secure coding errors commonly found in JavaScript. And if you make it that far, it's level 3, boss round, employing advanced techniques leveraged by Sandworm APT to compromise, pivot from, and destroy a server. Complete all 3 challenges, download your certificate of completion, upload it to LinkedIn, and tag Infosec for your chance to win a $100 Amazon gift card, an Infosec hoodie, a 1-year subscription to Infosec Skills so you can keep on learning, and a whole lot of bragging rights with your friends. Just go to infosecinstitute.com/challenge and show us what you can do. Today on Cyberwork, author of the Cybersecurity Yearbook, Richard Stiennon, is my very special guest. Richard talks about creating the first ISP in the Midwest in the 1990s, the role of the Cybersecurity Yearbook in telling the history of cybersecurity, and the best place to start your cybersecurity career. Hint, it's not necessarily with the big firms. Coming up on Cyberwork. Welcome to this week's episode of the Cyberwork with Infosec podcast. Each week, we talk with a different industry thought leader about cybersecurity trends, the way those trends affect the work of Infosec professionals, and offer tips for breaking in or moving up the ladder in the cybersecurity industry. Richard Stiennon is Chief Research Analyst for IT Harvest, the firm he founded in 2005 to cover the 2,615 vendors that make up the IT security industry. He has presented on the topic of cybersecurity in 31 countries on 6 continents. He was a lecturer at Charles Sturt University in Australia. He is the author of Security Yearbook 2021, a history and directory of the IT security industry. He published Curmudgeon, How to Succeed as an Industry Analyst in 2020. And in 2019, he published Secure Cloud Transformation, the CIO's Journey. He also wrote Surviving Cyberwar from 2010 and Washington Post bestseller, There Will Be Cyberwar. He writes for Security Boulevard and the Analyst Syndicate, which is where we heard about him. He is a member of the advisory board at several technology startups and sits on the board for Anitian. Oh boy, there's a new one for me. Stiennon was Chief Strategy Officer for Blanco Technology Group, the Chief Marketing Officer for Fortinet Inc., and VP Threat Researcher at WebRoot Software. Prior to that, he was a Research VP at Gardner. He has a BS in Aerospace Engineering and his MA in War in the Modern World from King's College London. So as you imagine, we wanted to talk to Richard today about his work with the Security Yearbook. So Richard, thank you very much for joining me today. Welcome to Cyberwork.
Oh, it's awesome to be here. Thanks, Chris.
So we like to start by getting the story of our guests' cybersecurity journey in their own words. Your resume and background show that you go all the way back to 1994, and you were founder of Rust.net, one of the first ISPs in the Midwest. And I'm pretty sure a friend of mine from college was on RustNet. I remember that name. You were also the director of the first managed security service provider, Netrex Inc., bought by ISS, now IBM in the 90s. And we're working on pen testing rules for PricewaterhouseCoopers all the way back in the dawn of pen testing, 1996. So after a career of study 10 years earlier in engineering, what was the draw of computers and security in the mid-90s?
It was really first I discovered the internet, like back then everybody did. As near as I could tell, 11 months before Bill Gates had his eureka, this internet thing's going to be
right.
Great.
Okay.
But everybody had that experience, right? You go,
yeah,
this is fantastic.
Look at this.
Interacting with people, I can get all this information. And I started my ISP practically the same month that Mozilla first came out, the first free version of it. And it was such a learning curve. It was, I went from automotive engineer, with a startup that I had then with 25 employees, and I was using the internet to manage them around the world, right? So we had stuff going on in Munich, we had stuff going on in Australia, and I realized everybody needs the internet. Started the ISP, and over the next 12 months, got my networking education. Not very much security, but
right.
The story of my life is I do startups, and then somebody comes in and steals everything from me, and that's exactly what happened with RustNet.
Back to the drawing board then. Yeah.
And so I went to essentially a competitor here in Michigan called Netrex that was starting an ISP, except they had this crazy idea to provide secure access to the internet.
Yeah, it was pretty wild and crazy at that point.
Yeah, it was great. It was well before its time because they actually sold clean pipes, and they would sell it T1 to, I was director of the automotive sector, so I sold them to Ford and ITT Automotive. The T1 would connect their network to our data center, which was a closet in our offices. But then we'd have, Solera machines running Checkpoint and Cisco gear and firewalls and stuff.
Were most of your clients for Netrex, was that mostly sort of enterprise things like Ford in the auto industry? Okay.
Yep. Across the board. Yeah. And then I went to PwC to get into the bigger enterprise engagements, right? And that was my first exposure to, SunTrust Bank and BNSF Railroad. We did a pen test of Dell's e-commerce website at the time. And it was great to see it from the perspective of a big 5 audit company, now big 4, I think.
Right.
And that, just gave me all this practical experience. I ran their firewall labs. I got to try a bunch of firewalls and set them up and try and configure them and stuff. And so when Gartner needed somebody to backfill for John Pescatori as an analyst to cover the space, they interviewed me. They actually didn't take, I didn't accept their first offer because it was just, seemed lowballed and something. So I went off doing some other entrepreneurial thing. Can't remember what, but back then it was still the tail end of the .com boom.
Right.
And there was still a whole bunch of founders that thought they're going to go places and all that. So I was working with all of them. Luckily, Gartner called me back and said I was the best candidate. So I took that job. And that was a great job because it was the first time, other than the drive to do entrepreneurial things, which I've done 24 times, and obviously I'm not good at it, right? I wouldn't be working.
Yeah.
But I did discover that being an industry analyst is a perfect job for me, right? Because it's research, learning, talking to people. Yeah, this is great.
I'm excited to jump into that in just a moment, but I am a little curious because you were a pen tester in 1996, which to me seems like even like the sort of pre-Cambrian dark ages of pen testing. We just had Gemma Moore on, and she was talking about what pen testing was like around 2000, which was, just how limited the tool sets were and how different it was. Can you talk about what pen testing systems was like in 1996 compared to now?
Yeah, so there were some awesome tools. CyberCop. It was one we used, and then we also use Internet Security Scanner from ISS. And they're much like today's tools, right? You just point them at an IP address range, scan all 64,000 ports, get all the vulnerabilities, and then you'd have to, essentially be a script kiddie and say, oh, there's a vulnerability. How do I attack that? And then you'd, Google around until you found some way to do it and break in. But there's some things that we don't do very much anymore. We would war dial the company headquarters or whatever office they want to look at. We war dialed MasterCard.
Can you describe what war dialing is?
Yes, it's you just run a little Linux box with some scripts in it, and you call every phone number in the office. And you're looking for computers that answer with a modem, right?
Gotcha.
So if you get that particular call, the war dialer will actually try and finish the handshake and get a prompt. And from the prompt, it can tell, if it's a Windows machine or a Unix machine or an IBM mainframe. And then now you got your list of targets, and now you just go and try and log in and guess passwords. Some of them don't need passwords.
Right.
But while you're war dialing, you also discover conference phones and voice message systems. And then hackers used to, especially with a conference room phone, they would break in, and the password would always be 000 or something simple, and nobody's monitoring.
Admin,
so you just try everything. Admin, nothing. This is you're punching on a phone deck.
Oh yeah. There you go.
And once you got in, it would walk you through the instructions for forwarding the phone. And people would break in and forward the phone back to their home country, Egypt or wherever. Okay. And then they tell all their family, if you want to call home, just call this number first.
Just and dial 7 digits.
Yeah. So people would lose tens of thousands of dollars a month from people abusing that access.
Wow. So, okay, that's a pretty cool war story there. I always like to hear about that because it is so different now. But so going back to what you said, between your 4 years at Gartner, 2004, and VP Research, 2 years at VP Threat Research at WebRoot Software, and your decade as Chief Research Analyst at your own company, IT Harvest, as well as authoring the book Up and to the Right, helping technology marketers and execs make it to the Leaders Quadrant. As you said, research analyst is clearly the main hat you wear. So for our listeners who are trying on their own different career hats, can you walk us through the work of a research analyst? How do you learn what you do, and what is your day-to-day job and work like?
Sure. First of all, the qualities of a good analyst or somebody who's cut out for the role, right, is fascination with the technology and desire to learn everything in the world that you can. Okay. The ability to speak publicly and the ability to write. So if you've got those things, so this isn't your typical developer, right, who quite often, they're like me. When I started in the automotive industry, I couldn't write a coherent sentence. So it takes some time to develop those skills as well as your technology specialty. But if you've got a specialty, then your day-to-day is talking to the vendors of that technology, basically getting briefed. It's a little difficult. I would need 10 people in my firm in order to cover the now 2,680 vendors that I track. But that would need 200 hour-long Zoom conferences every year, which is, I used to do that many at Gartner. So it's doable and it's exhausting.
Exhausting, yeah.
But you love it, because you're learning so much and you become an expert on all the available solutions. And then that makes you able to advise the end user organizations on who they should be looking at, who they should be talking to, and help them with their product selection choices. And in security, you tend to help them with their architectures as well. Their layers of defense and all the rest. So briefings are one thing, and you don't make any money doing briefings. So you have to turn that into published research. And then quite often vendors will reach out to you for their own go-to-market messaging, and you can consult with them on that. You can do strategic engagements with them, or simply doing webinars. And until 2020, most of my income was public speaking. Yeah. And people would hire me to travel the world and speak at conferences. And, it was easily an enjoyable part of the job. But it's, I've had to revamp that entire model in the last 18 months.
Yeah. Can we, is this a sort of a type of job where, shy of working for Gartner, is this the sort of thing where you kind of hang your own shingle out? Is it mostly a freelance thing, or are a lot of research analysts sort of part of organizations or larger firms?
Yeah, the easiest path is to go to one of the big organizations, so Gartner, Forrester, Ovum,
right?
Because that gives you the credentials and it gives you the podium to speak from, and people start recognizing your name and stuff. It's a little bit like being in any professional services, a lawyer or something, and you should start at a firm to learn all the ins and outs and why you hate working at the firm before you start your own. Right. Though unlike law firms where the lawyers kind of take their clients with them when they leave, that doesn't really happen with being an analyst, because they usually have non-competes that don't allow you to do that.
Right. Gotcha. Yeah. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. People used to treat being an analyst, especially at Gartner, as a good retirement job. When you're done with your 20 years at IBM or whatever, you join Gartner, and
then you sort of cash in on all the knowledge that you sort of acquired sort of automatically or whatever. Okay.
Exactly. Okay. So not cash in, because working as an analyst doesn't pay as well as a VP of something.
Right. You transition to your next stage or whatever.
Yeah. Exactly.
Gotcha. So as mentioned with above with Up and to the Right, you've also authored several other books I want to talk briefly about, including 2010's Surviving Cyberwar and 2015's There Will Be Cyberwar. And, you mentioned that you have, a master's degree in war in the modern world. Can you talk about how the cyberwar landscape changed since you authored those books? Where and how are the threats coming from in 2021 and beyond? And how do these tactics need to change or update to counteract them?
Yeah, the single biggest change was right as I went to press with Surviving Cyberwar. U.S. Cyber Command was stood up, as they say, May 21st, 2010. And that kind of institutionalized using cyber by militaries. And I'm very particular about defining what cyber war means. To me, it's when militaries use cyber means to, project force in any way. And ideally, a war would be when both sides are using cyber means during a battle, right? Not the cyber Pearl Harbor where somebody takes down the U.S. power grid. That's a cyber 9/11, right?
Yeah, right.
Big difference, right? There has to be we know that there have been plans, especially by Israel, to massively bombard Iran with a cyber attack before they launch missiles to take out the nuclear capability, right? That would be cyber war for sure. And that's perfectly logical because, cyber war is about as effective as, air warfare, right? Which has never, ever been a successful thing, right? Air warfare does not win wars. You have to have boots on the grounds. And when I wrote Surviving Cyber War, I was, relying on my amateur military historian, predilection. And I realized I probably would not be viewed as very academically rigorous in writing that. So that's why I went back to school at King's College to study war at I think the most respected school for that.
Right.
And out of that came my master's thesis on the revolution in military affairs and how that is playing out into the next revolution, which is using cyber means. And that's when I wrote There Will Be Cyber War.
Gotcha. Yeah, we've had several guests on now who have been, whose area of expertise is security infrastructure and talking about just the acres of unsecured, municipal, water supplies, electrical grids, and things like that, and how. I'm of the opinion that, people getting into cybersecurity now should all go to their local municipality and say, like, how can I tighten up my, city hall and things like that, and all and so forth. But, when you start thinking about the scope of it, as Emily Miller of Makana said, it's hard not to drink while you're reading because it's just so scary and so endemic and so massive. So the cyber 9/11 aspect, as you said, it seems very real once you start reading about it.
The next level on that maturity curve, first you understand just how poorly everything is protected. The final level of maturity is to accept that and live with it. Right? Think about what you can do to recover.
Find other remediation methods.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So I just wanted to jump into that sideways there a little bit, but our main discussion for today, obviously, is your magnum opus, shall we say, the massive Security Yearbook, first undertaken in 2020 and now massively updated in 2021. As you recently said, Security Yearbook has become my life's work. It is a full-time job, just keeping up with the space. In this book, I incorporate everything I have learned in 25 years of being part of an industry that grows over 24% every year. So does that kind of make you the Robert Caro of cybersecurity? Is this going to be an endeavor that you predict will be your primary work from now on?
It's definitely my primary work from now on. I would never compare myself to Mr. Caro.
Okay.
But hey, it's probably closer to the mark than somebody calling me the Herodotus of cybersecurity. Okay. Now that's going too far.
Yes. Right. Exactly. I'm always fascinated with people who find one thing and it's like, this is for the rest of my life. This is what I'm going to do. I'm gonna, and I think I wanted to mention before. I'm sorry, I don't want to cut you off, but as far as like security analysts or research analysts and so forth. It seems like this would be a really good job for people who have like a natural predilection to know every single thing about one thing, like to completely control a world like this. So is that I imagine that sort of is in your brain when you're working on these yearbooks, is like, I know every inch of this map.
Yeah, that's true about industry analysts in general, but also true is that they're interested in everything. Yes. So they have as much trouble focusing as anybody else.
Right.
And unfortunately, sometimes you'll see them, just all of a sudden pontificate on something that they don't know everything about. And you got to be aware of when they're doing that. Just because they're respected in their field doesn't mean they're experts on
goes to their head.
Should have evacuated from Afghanistan, for instance.
Sure.
Yeah.
So tell me about the research process, of the yearbook, and especially how the first one came together in 2020. I mean, it's such a massive and sort of unprecedented undertaking. Had you done any other projects on this scale before? And did you have like research assistants, or did you personally comb through every profile and analysis yourself?
Well, the process was started 10 years ago when I started collecting just a spreadsheet of all the vendors, right? And so I could, get a feel for the space. And my goal was to get to the point where I could do a bottom-up market sizing analysis. Because, when Gartner or Forrester tells us how big the security industry is, they're just guessing, right?
Yeah.
Guessing. Mm-hmm. And I realized when they predicted, when I was at Gartner, we said the security industry was $2.5 billion industry. And that was big in middle of 2000. And by 2013, Gartner was saying it was a $180 billion industry. But in the ensuing years, they never once predicted growth of more than 8% for the industry. If you do the reverse calculation, going from 2.5 to 180 in 10 years is 34% compound annual growth.
Wow.
So I knew that there's something going on here that the analyst firms aren't talking about. And even the, Wall Street analysts should be aware of this as well. And I talk to Wall Street analysts and private equity a lot, and they get all excited about a company that, that they're saying, hey, we're looking at security and we see that, Checkpoint grew 6% last year. And that's so much better than the REITs and the oil and gas industry that we're totally in. And I'm going to hold on a second. The industry is growing at least 24%, possibly 34%. So Checkpoint is losing market share in the firewall space, and they have been for a decade. Mm-hmm. So keep that in mind. If you want to buy their debentures, fine. They'll be able to pay the interest on it, no problem. But if you're looking for tapping into the growth of the security industry, look for the companies like Palo Alto, Fortinet, Zscaler that are growing at 30 to 40% year over year. So, so even when I launched IT Harvest, the name of IT Harvest was I was going to harvest all the data and use it for my analysis, right?
Right.
And inspired by a olive oil harvest that I went to that winter.
Okay.
The
detail there.
So I actually built a subscription service way back then, where you buy a subscription and get access to my data.
Gotcha.
Very, 3 marketers bought into it. And I just didn't see the appetite for that, but I kept my list and updated it pretty much every year, but it was a real effort. And let me tell you, going through the list, we always went through alphabetically and just to check to see if the company's still there and if they're still doing the same thing, if they've been acquired. You get to the S's and it just take a week to get through all the S's because that's most security companies are named security something, right?
Yeah, right.
And those cybers catching up, CY, any CY beginning.
CY, yeah.
So anyways, by the time I realized, I went to RSA 2019 and just bumped into so many people. I was signing the cloud transformation book, and people were coming up and saying, yeah, my employer hired me 2 weeks ago and they sent me to this conference to learn about the industry. And I was thinking, this is the last place you want to go to learn about the industry. I need to write a book to tell people what's gone before.
There you go.
So I combined the two, right? The I had to write the history of the industry, but then I also included the directory in the back.
Right.
And then how do you add to that every year? So it's truly a yearbook. And, if you bought Security Yearbook 2021, the current one, you would get all the content from 2020, except that the directory is completely updated. So,
gotcha.
Snapshot in time of all the vendors in the space last year. And then I added the delta in headcount for each vendor, because I track that on a quarterly basis. So now you can immediately see if a vendor is growing or shrinking. That's pretty valuable information at first blush when you're doing vendor selection. And I've partnered with America's Growth Capital Partners to get all of the M&A activity each year. And CISA's agreed to let me publish all of the serious cyber breaches for the year. So it'll be a record of those. You can go back, what year was that? Whatever.
Wow.
OPM breach. And then all the fundings as well. So, and I capture that from Crunchbase.
Okay.
So, and you asked about, this is I do outsource the data gathering for headcount, for instance.
Okay.
And I outsource that to a team in India, and they can look at every single company and record the headcount in a day. So I don't know how they do that. They claim they're doing it by hand. So there must be 20 of them doing it.
Man. Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And so anyways, so I'm just adding to it every single year. This coming year will be the first time I have an in memoriam section where I have to, which I'm going to struggle with, but I have to write about all of the people we've lost in the previous year.
Yeah, for sure.
Just to give them some sort of record. So you can see I've got big plans for it, and it's something I can continue to do. And my goal is to make it, just something everybody in the industry has to have, right? And it's sitting on their desktop. Yeah. They refer to it as often as I do, because I use it for my own resource. And of course, I've got an advantage. I've got the original data sitting in front of me in a big database,
right?
Which I use constantly. So that's next phase. We'll be republishing that as a subscription service. So, but things have changed in the last 15 years, so it should be easier to do.
Okay. Is there anything you would have wanted to do differently with the 2020 or 2021 yearbook? Was there any stories or profiles that didn't make it under the published deadline that you regret having to cut, or just any things that you learned doing 2020 that you incorporated in 2021?
Well, luckily I can always ask, schedule the interviews for the next year.
Right.
So, and this year I still have to get Eugene Kaspersky's story. And of course, I've tried to stick in the, last century for the pioneers that I interview to get those early stories. But now, I've pretty much exhausted those. And now I'm looking to the first decade of the 2000s, where some of the huge companies we've got today were founded back then.
Is there going to be a point where just if as you said in the 2021 update, you're going to be getting everything from 2020 plus all the new stuff? Is there going to be a point where it gets prohibitively large and you'll have to start sort of paring things out, or is it just going to keep getting bigger and bigger each year?
No, there'll be points where it pairs out. This year, I plan a complete rewrite of the history, and then start to break out histories and descriptions of each of the subsegments.
Gotcha.
So, I've been covering the major buckets, but there could be a history of deception, right? So because there's still people who start new deception vendors, they don't know what went before. So it'd be great if they had a book to refer to, and just so they know some of the history.
Well, let's talk about that. In the PR Newswire piece that I read about your book, it noted Security Yearbook 2021 is not a summary of technologies. This is a book filled with a rich histories of the vendors and the people behind the companies, the misfits and the pioneers, that have built today's 300 plus billion cybersecurity industry. So what is the importance of looking at cybersecurity as a series of histories and stories? So people with an interest in history of all kinds will obviously love it, but in terms of people in the industry, or especially people getting into the industry, how do these personal stories help one to make sense of cybersecurity?
Yeah, if you, for instance, if I had written about this, how between Netscape and VeriSign, they created something called client-side certificates, and there were a bunch of startups that used them for authentication. Then when you hear about, Beyond Identity starting up with $150 million A round last year, you'd scratch your head and you go, oh, that sounds a heck of a lot like the old stuff. And to see any of the zero trust, the access control vendors, they look exactly like web single sign-on, because they are. Yeah. And so it's good to understand the context for the new buzzwords. And just know where they came from. And as an analyst, you want to, or somebody who's buying this stuff, you want to understand what changed. Why is it now possible or a hot thing to use client-side certificates? And what changed is every single piece of new silicon has a secure enclave on board where you can store a certificate securely.
That makes sense. So in the yearbook, you noted that, quote, there were 2 notable failures of funded startups added to the chapter on failures, and that 271 vendors received new funding for a total of $10 billion in new investments. Did you see any patterns in these new investments? What are investors investing in, and what do their investments suggest about where they see the industry going? And based on what you've read, do you think they're making the right call about where they think things are going, where they're putting the money?
So the ones that are making the right calls and putting their money in a good place are the ones that are making investments that we barely see, right? $10 million, $20 million. So they fall way down below. Right. The ones that are making $150 million and such are just financial bets. They're pushing everything onto the pass line at the craps table.
Gotcha. Yeah.
But they're doing it, with their financial savvy. They see that Beyond Identity got X. So these guys, maybe they think they can beat them in the market. They got a better go-to-market strategy. Let's put $200 million in them and play out that game and get the company public or sell it to another private equity company once you're making revenue. And that's the biggest shift that we see going on is in the old days, early 2000s, the big acquirers were Symantec, McAfee, and Cisco. Okay. And they would just buy the hottest company in each new sector and try and make it work. And today you've got Palo Alto doing a little bit of that. But you have companies getting into security like VMware that are doing a bunch of acquisitions. But the real change is the activity from private equity. So you've got, new private equity firms that have got billions of dollars at their disposal, getting into security, and they make a big bet with that $150 million investment. Can you contrast that with the small but targeted investments, the 10 millions, as you say? Like, what is the research, or what is the mindset? I mean, is it just with companies with less to spend, or are they of the opinion that, like, I know exactly what I'm going to get with this 10 million, rather than just sort of the blast furnace of $150 million thrown at a problem? Yeah, in my experience, the VCs putting the smaller figures in, right? They know what the 10 million is going to be used for, develop the product, grow the company to 100 people before the next round is needed. And they've decided that the product or service is unique, differentiated, and able to scale. And they've made that evaluation. And quite often they don't even talk to industry analysts. They do talk to CISOs about their needs and what problems they're having. So they're experts in the security industry. They all have databases like I do of all the vendors. They know all the ones that are out there looking for money. They talk to each other. They usually form consortiums to limit their exposure. But it's the ones that want to sit on the board and help guide the company that have the most vested interest.
Yeah. Now, you also noted that the impact, quote, the impact of COVID-19 slowed growth for many vendors as they expected demand to drop. But the move to work from home increased demand for technology to protect newly distributed organizations, and that zero trust networking and SASE solutions saw tremendous growth in 2020. Can you give me some examples of companies that, rather than playing safe and slow down during these uncertain times, managed to grow and take advantage of the demand?
When I sample the market, I'll talk to a vendor last July. So after 6 months of COVID, and I'll ask them, why did you, actually fall in employment? And they said, well, we don't know what's going to happen. And Sequoia is telling everybody this is just like 2008. So batten down the hatches and try and weather the storm with your funds. And yet they tell me that the business increased. So that because people are, getting inundated with ransomware attacks, and so security in general has a big push, and they all caught up in the last half of 2020 on their hiring, right? So they pent up demand, people were probably overworked, so they started hiring dramatically. The ones that just doubled down and plowed ahead, of course, were the ones that got huge fundings early in the year, right?
Yep.
So, and they
can afford to take the chance.
Yeah. They've got a longer term view. They've got a 3 or 4 year run rate with the funds that they've got on hand. So they just get into it.
Yeah. So as I mentioned at the top of the show, cyberwork is aimed at people who are trying to move up the ladder in cybersecurity, people feeling stuck in their current job, trying to make the leap to something new within cybersecurity. So again, to your the PR Newswire piece, it's noted via the yearbook that, quote, the industry is subdivided into 16 different sectors, including network, endpoint, data security, GRC, MSSPs. New sectors such as security analytics, threat intelligence, and deception will be of particular interest. Have you heard about people interested in getting into the cybersecurity industry who have focused their area of interest and study based on researching around different sectors of your book? Would that be a viable thing, or is that something that you kind of do when you're already inside?
That's certainly what I encourage people to do, right? I'm reaching out to colleges and universities, trying to get them to distribute the book.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, colleges are still completely fixated on getting people to pass their certified ethical hacking exam.
Sure. Yeah.
And if that's your predilection, if you just love breaking into stuff, then go for it. You don't need a certification to do that. You just go ahead and do it and learn all the tools.
There you go.
But if you're looking at it as, a professional career, then, you should look at learning tools, so learn the big tools, how to manage them, how to deploy them, how to update them, all the rest. And you can do that. You can take classes directly from the vendors. You could probably find a cyber low tech, such as yourself, I'm sure, and get experience in those tools. And that immediately, you put that in your resume, then all the resume filters that you are submitting to will pick up on that, and you'll go to the top of the list, right? They're not going to be able to find enough, cybersecurity generalists. It's not like mechanical engineering, right?
Right.
When I got a degree, I could take any job in the engineering field because the hirer knew they'd have to train me about, in my case, car seats.
Sure. Got it.
And same with that, but you can't give somebody a deep enough cybersecurity knowledge for them to fit in anywhere. So learn specific tools. And if you want to work at a company, right now, there's a little problem with that, right? Because you're going, the best jobs and the highest paying jobs are at horrible, boring companies. Citigroup, JP Morgan Chase. Do you want to work at a big bank that has 6,000 developers and 2,000 security people?
Yeah.
You'll be a cog in a wheel.
Very small cog. Yeah.
Yeah. And, it's all it takes is time to be, expert in your particular area. And, if you can write, then you blog about it, then pretty soon you're writing your own ticket. That's great.
Yeah.
But if you're just starting out and you've got an undergraduate degree in something technical, or you just like computers, I highly recommend going to work for a vendor. So, they go to their websites, they have hundreds of job openings, and some of them aren't directly in security. But if you can be a sales engineer, that's an awesome job, right?
Yeah.
All you do is go around and you demo the product and become expert with it.
There you go.
You usually work with, a management hierarchy of sales engineers. So you get to impact the product because you say, hey, every time I demo this, people say you should do this, and you feed that back up. So you get some impact on the product.
There you go.
And then you're working closely with a sales team, in region, and you get part of their commission structure. So you get a nice salary. And if you happen to be that in a good sales team with a product that is selling well, you could do extremely well, you can do, but you'd never have to be a salesperson, right?
Right.
Because who wants to be that? Not to denigrate sales.
No.
If you can do sales, then you should just go right into sales. No question. I've known here in Michigan, I've known a sales engineer who's just good at it, and he's worked at every company as it comes along. He has to wait until he got a big enough structure that they need his talents and
ready for his expert level skills there. Now, based on your extensive research of the industry via growth companies, failure companies, trends and movements from year to year, can you give any advice for listeners who are just starting their cybersecurity journey now, who are trying to future-proof their skills? Like, where do you see the need for cybersecurity professionals going in the coming years? And of the job and industry role types you highlight in the yearbook, which ones are the fastest growing, and are there any that have a declining number of jobs? Because I think, we get so many comments from people who are just getting started, and there's always this feeling of like, what if I choose the wrong thing and then I'm cursed for life, but I think everyone wants to know, like, what's the fast track, and so, like, what do you see is on what's on the rise and what's on the fall? And if you were to sort of be a betting person, like, where would you bet that the sort of like the job roles in the industries are going in the coming years?
It's the lucky thing is you can't bet wrong.
Really?
Every single sector of the security space is good to get into.
Okay.
So it could be, if you're totally into risk management, least favorite category, right? But you like government policies and lining up with them and ISO certification and all that. Then you go into that, and you'll never have to. You still have to work, but
right.
You won't
sweat where your next job's coming from. Yeah,
that's right. You'll always be employable. And then if you want to be more of a system administrator type, there's anything in that space, right? So it's definitely going to be cloud focused going forward. If you were a Windows NT expert, maybe that would be a time where you have to lift and shift yourself. Okay. But right now, that said, I would definitely get all the skills with AWS and Azure and GCP that you could. GCP, if you're going to work in higher education or state and local government, because they tend to go for free or cheap. But AWS is where all the cool kids go. Azure is where all the big company people go, right?
Okay,
got to be in Microsoft.
Yep.
And if you're a Microsoft fanboy, perfect place to be, right? And just understand Azure, and I mean every single month Azure is a different thing.
Yeah.
So there's lots and lots to learn,
right?
And you had leapfrog the skill sets of everybody by jumping on the thing they just announced, and digging into it and learning all about it, and then spinning up something that they let you do, and it's just exciting time.
Nice. Do you keep up at all with? I know, like I said, you were sort of a pen tester in the 90s. Do you keep up at all with sort of like current pen testing trends at all, or is that just in your past now?
No, yeah, I watch it all the time. Because I mean, to me, the most fascinating research reports I can read are the things that either the vuln researchers are doing, or the people developing the exploit kits. And it's super important to keep up on that. It's still, the methodologies are still completely the same. It's just the tools for going deeper.
Tools are faster and better. Yeah.
Faster, better, much more sophisticated, somewhat automated now. And it's, it might be, if you were a standalone pen tester, I mean, when I left PwC, that was one of my options, right? Is, hey, at PwC, we would charge $90,000 for a pen test of a very limited, sector, headquarters only at BNSF Railroad. You could go to a local expert and get that for $20,000. And that expert would be very happy to get the $20,000 because I didn't share it with anybody. Yeah. I didn't get anything extra from doing a big engagement. I just had a job.
Yep.
And I used to advise people later when I was at Gartner, look, if you want a real pen test, if your goal is to find your vulnerabilities and how people could get in, hire the local expert because they've been doing it for a longer time. If you hire PwC or Coopers and Lybrand, and maybe it's not the case anymore, but back then you would get a whole bunch of MBA guys that had spent 2 years learning how to do pen testing, right?
Right,
it's all new to them every single time.
Yeah, so, interesting.
Yeah, so it's still for an independent job, it's still great.
Yeah.
I would tell you the thing to get into right now is incident response.
All right. That's what we're glad to hear. Okay.
Every security consulting company I talk to that does incident response is just book solid. Okay. There's one company in my hometown, Madison, Wisconsin, that says they're going to do 1,200 engagements this year. They grew from 35 to 100 people. Wow. And those are all responses to ransomware incidents. And they're highlighted or brought to them by the insurance companies that are looking at paying the big bucks.
Yeah.
And the incident response is formulaic, right? You deploy EDR to every device that you can reach on the network, figure out what went on, the forensic side of it, and then clean up all the machines and get the attackers out. And sometimes do the data recovery if it's possible.
Yeah.
That's huge industry. And obviously we know that because we've seen Mandiant being so successful at it for a decade now. 13 years since the D1 report came out.
Yep. Yeah. And I think it also, as we are moving towards that understanding that you're going to be breached, it's just a matter of time, then obviously the role of incident response is more important as we stop sort of engaging in the magical thinking of, if we build the wall high enough, they're not going to get through.
Yeah. Or I think somebody said, if you think you haven't been breached, you're just wrong. You're probably breached right now.
Right now. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So going back again for listeners who want to learn how to become a research analyst like yourself, can you tell me about where you get started sort of learning that? What are the sort of first steps that someone watching this, if they're doing, they're in a help desk right now, or they're like, oh, that sounds great, I really want to do that. What's the first thing that they can do tonight to get their first foot on the path?
Read my book, Curmudgeon.
All right. Curmudgeon. Okay. Yes. Right. Great.
So, and I've had contributions from 6 or 7 of the analyst syndicate on that. And those guys all have, 20 years experience at Gartner, whereas I only had 4. So they really know this business. But it gives you a feel too for the day to day. I don't, it's not a book that says you too can retire to a beach. There's nothing like that.
No. Yeah.
It's more like you too can never retire because, you're just
you'll be too busy doing the thing that you like doing to notice that your bank isn't growing at all.
Yeah. I mean, you can do this, I presume, as long as my eyesight and my voice and my fingers work. I can do this when I'm 80.
There you go. Okay. So as we wrap up today, can you tell me about what's up next for you? Obviously, Security Yearbook 2022. Do you have any sort of big changes or upgrades that you've got planned for that?
The biggest change is turning it into a digital version that you can subscribe to.
Gotcha.
And they'll kind of flip-flop, I think, I'm hoping, the model. So now the book will just be a teaser about the data that's available.
Gotcha.
And turn me into I'll have a SaaS company, and then I can, reinvest in, hiring analysts and doing research to enrich those data sets all the time. But in the meantime, I'm still, climbing the hill to get, this book should sell 50,000 copies every single year. Right? Think of this number of students, the number of, there's the potential market is 2 or 3 million people. And out of that, there must be 50,000 people who read, right? I'm thinking.
Right.
I don't know.
And are thinking ahead too.
And want to, have all that knowledge available to them as quickly. So the cool thing about, republishing the same kind of book every single year is all of the work I did during RSA 2020, which was a week before the shutdown, marketing the book and all the buzz that I generated carries over. Right now, that's if you come out with a completely different book every year, which I've done for 10 years, you're starting from scratch every single time. Yeah. Now people are going to go, next year they'll go, I meant to buy the 2021, not one. I just buy the 2022.
Yeah. And of course, if you're a collector, you're like, I got to have them all.
Yeah, definitely. There will be, collector's paths, assuming I don't sell out, because I'm not going to, if I do sell out, I'm not going to do a print run unless I sell out this month. And then I'll do a print run to tide you over. Yeah.
All right. One last question for all the marbles. Where should our listeners go online to learn more about Richard Stiennon and the Security Yearbook?
Best places you can either go to security-yearbook.com.
Okay.
Or you can go to it-harvest.com, and that's my main website.
There you go.
Eventually, that's where the data from the yearbook will be published.
Okay. Any Twitter sites or LinkedIn's that you want to promote?
Sure. You always find me on LinkedIn. Just Google my name. There's only 6 Stiennons, I think.
Okay.
On Twitter, I'm at Stiennon and at cyberwar.
Perfect. Richard,
good.
Thank you so much for joining us today and for all your great insights on the industry. I really appreciate it.
No, my pleasure. Thanks, Chris.
And as always, thank you to everyone listening at home, listening at work, or listening to us at work from home. New episodes of the Cyberwork podcast are available every Monday at 1 p.m. Central, both on our YouTube page and on audio wherever fine podcasts are downloaded. Also, I'm excited to announce that our Infosec Skills platform will be releasing a new challenge every month with 3 hands-on labs to put your cyber skills to the test. In September, you'll start in our Security Plus lab, exploring the ins and outs of secure and insecure protocols. Level 2, move on to explore secure coding errors commonly found in JavaScript. If you make it that far, it's level 3, boss round, deploying advanced techniques leveraged by Sandworm APT to compromise, pivot from, and destroy a server. Complete all 3 challenges, download your certificate of completion, upload it to LinkedIn, and tag Infosec for your chance to win a $100 Amazon gift card, an Infosec hoodie, and a 1-year subscription to the Infosec Skills platform so you can keep on learning. Just go to infosecinstitute.com/challenge and accept the challenge today. Thank you once again to Richard Stiennon, and thank you all so much for listening and watching. We will speak to you next week.